Sales Dev Squad. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Sales Dev Squad podcast. We got a super awesome guest for you guys today. We have Armand Farrokh, who is currently the Director of Sales over at Carta. He currently manages 40 plus SMB AEs and SDRs. He's also the podcast host of 30 Minutes to President's Club. Super awesome guy, blowing up on LinkedIn. Just a true leader for his team, and he's doing a lot of great stuff for the sales community lately. Armand, thanks so much for hopping on the podcast today, man.
Man, I don't even need to introduce myself, Mateo. What a job. Very well done, my man. Excited to be here.
That's awesome, man. Sales Dev Squad will be covering a bit more about some actionable tactics that any SDR and AE can take away sort of, with objection handling as a result or relates to this sort of period that we're in. We'll learn a little bit more about, what sort of advice that Armand has, for SDRs and AEs out there right now. And I'd love to just to hop into it here, Armand. I guess, for any SDR or AE out there that's, continuing to struggle to, overcome objections, either by phone, email, whatever the case may be. Would love to just hear some of your thoughts on how your team is sort of, taking actionable tactics there.
Yeah, man, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier. Is a couple months ago, it was all COVID, change your whole sales approach, lead with empathy and all this nonsense that was honestly just like, hey, be a good salesperson. It was just masked with COVID. And so honestly, my objection handling tactics for today are relatively similar to what they were 4 months ago. There might just be a slight twist at the end of the curveball. And so, for example, I'm curious to hear from your perspective, what are some of the most common objections that your audience is getting today, right?
I would say definitely around price, just not good timing. Honestly, just getting ghosted, I guess.
Yeah. And so the ghosted one, that one's tough. That's not even an objection. That's like the lack of an objection. Almost, I would almost rather come on, fight me, bro. Right? Like, give me an objection. Let's go back and forth. So let's talk about the timing one, because that tends to be what my team runs into the most. And the timing one tends to sound like, call me in 6 months, call me in 3 months. Or it can be a little bit more discreet, and it can sound like, send me an email, right? And a lot of people freak out when somebody says, call me back in 3 months. And so they either say, well, can I just get 15 minutes tomorrow and maybe we can set up some time to talk and then you can make a decision later on. Or they say, great, I'll call you back in 3 months. And then you're chasing the guy. And then it's another 3 months and another 3 months. And you're chasing maybes forever. And so the goal with this objection is not to necessarily get all of the yeses in the world. It's to get rid of all the maybes. And hopefully you'll get some yeses on the way. And so I call it the double ask. And so the way it sounds is I'm going to ask you permission to ask you a tough question. And so you tell me, call me back in 3 months. Right now it's COVID. It's just, it's crazy. Like, I don't have time for any of this crap. And I say, honestly, Mateo, I've had a really good conversation with you here. Do you mind if I ask you a brutally honest question? Because I'm happy to call you back in 3 months, but I do have a question. And just shut up. Wait. Once they say yes, they'll never say no. You say, well, honestly, most of the time, Mateo, when people ask me to call them back in 3 months, they're honestly just politely telling me to go away. And they're too nice to give me a no. Is that what's happening here? Or do you actually have something in mind in 3 months? And so I'm forcing them to either say, no, that's not going to happen. Like, that's not what I have in mind here. Or, yes, I was trying to blow you off. Or the third option, no, there is something going on in 3 months that would be a relevant buying event or something that would make me more of a fit than I am today. And so either way, you get out the maybes. You're either like, yes, the 3 month mark is correct. No, I'm actually trying to blow you off. Or like, fine, I'll take the meeting with you. And so you get the answer you need.
That's super interesting, man. Are there any particular objections that your team sort of is encountering as well? Obviously, you said timing is pretty common right now. I mean, how's your team like driving urgency? And maybe if you have any suggestions for sales teams that are, struggling to drive urgency when maybe their product or service, might not be like a necessity for businesses right now, or would love to just hear your thoughts around that area.
Yeah, it's not easy. And as you know, Mateo, the money is made in the discovery. And so this is going to vary company by company, solution by solution. I'll give you an example at Carta. So for those of you guys who don't know Carta, Carta allows you to issue equity to employees, do valuations, things that are typically time-based events associated with raising capital. Not a lot of people are raising capital right now. There are still rounds going up, but the number of rounds is going down. Overall, it's not like 4 months ago, 5 months ago when capital was super loose and fundraising rounds were popping out left and right. And so how do you start to raise urgency with those types of people if they're not raising around today? Well, you need to think of all of the different reasons that people buy when your cap table is quote unquote static. And the same thing goes for anybody else in the audience, is there are things that come with employee growth, which is movement. It's dynamicism in your employee base. There are things that come with raising more capital, right? There are things that come when you change a system. But when something is static, there's typically still 3, 4, 5 different things that occur from a maintenance standpoint that you can help with. So for example, I might not be saying anymore, hey, you just raised a round, so you need to do a valuation. My talk track might say, hey, typically when people are stuck in between rounds, they still need to interface with their investors. Every once in a while, they need to terminate an employee and let them exercise. And then every once in a while, they're issuing an option. Are you telling me that you're not doing any of those 3 things whatsoever? And so I took the 3 things that still happen in a static cap table, and I turned them into a typically question. And Mateo, if the answer is no to that, then honestly, it's probably not a fit. And that's okay. But very rarely does nobody need to interface with their investors, regardless of the situation. Does nobody need to have a way for employees to see their equity? And so on.
Mm-hmm. That's super interesting, man. I'm actually taking a look at one of your LinkedIn posts right now, and it just sort of talks about, bonding and rapport, and, your thoughts around that as far as, how it relates to just salespeople solving, problems. And it seems like you're a big proponent of doing discovery. Is there a wrong way to do discovery? Are reps not doing enough discovery? Are reps sort of not asking the right questions? What sort of tactics do you have around just, doing discovery properly?
Yeah,
in your opinion, I guess.
For sure. And we could have a whole session on this one. Discovery is tricky because what ends up happening is a great thing in the market is we've started to create this vibe that if you're talking the whole time, you're a horrible salesperson. If your talk to listen ratio is out of whack, you're a horrible salesperson. If you just bring somebody through a 3-hour demo without doing discovery, you're a horrible salesperson. And then the pendulum has started to swing in the complete opposite direction. And so when new reps hear that, they start asking these dumb, way too high level questions like, tell me about your priorities. Tell me about your business. What keeps you up at night? And those are the worst discovery questions that you could ever possibly ask. And that episode itself was on 30 Minutes to President's Club. It was with Joe Caprio, and he actually gave a really great framework for thinking about discovery. And so the way it typically starts is if my SDR has done good discovery, they've probably asked some good situational questions. How many people are on your cap table? How many employees do you have today? How many people are you going to hire? If they haven't done that, then I need to ask a couple of those because I need to get a little bit of a lay of the land. But very quickly, I need to get off of those situation and process questions. So that's the first step. So I might ask, I might know there are the top 2 or 3 buckets of problems my customers tend to have. And I might first start by trying to understand their process for handling each of those problems. Once I get the process down, you need to start going to pain questions and impact questions as quickly as possible. So what I always tell my team is someone managing their cap table on a spreadsheet is not a pain point. That is a situation. That is a process. The pain point is when I start asking you, well, how much did your attorney charge you? How much did you spend on your cap table? When you plan to issue out equity to those 5 employees, how do you plan to give them transparency so that they know how much their equity is worth and they keep working hard? And those are pain questions. And then I can go to impact questions when you start asking about, well, you're going to spend all this money managing your cap table and it's still going to be wrong. What's going to happen when you bring that to your board? What's going to happen when you bring that to your audit and it's wrong? And so that's how you start to do discovery. Understand the situation, get to pain questions, get to impact questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely, man. Would love to hear your thoughts around just, obviously these are some really great tactics that you can deploy, maybe like in a phone setting or like a Zoom setting. Like, I guess like, what are some ways that your team is sort of taking some, tactics as far as just like email objections, or how does your team sort of combat like email objections, I guess?
The first thing that everyone needs to know with email objections is, if you're writing a 4-paragraph response, stop writing your email. Less is more every single time. What I compare it to is, if you ever had a crazy ex who you say, hey, I want to break things off, or I want a 1-week break, and you get the wall of the text message, you're like, oh, crazy, get away from me, right? A little bit of an offensive example, but that is an example. And that's how you come off when somebody gives you a 2-word response, like not interested, and you write them a page. On the other end, they're like, what are you doing? Like, get out of here, man. Like, I was not expecting that. And so the super, super, super important thing to do is, when you're handling email objections, is you need to handle them with context about what you know about them, and leave a glimmer of hope as to how you might be able to solve their problem. And so you tell me you're not interested, which, by the way, is like the most dismissive objection out there. It's not even a real objection. I can do one of 2 things. The first thing I can do is I can do a pattern break. And what I mean by that is like, hey, thanks so much for for responding to my email. I'm not going to email you anymore, but for my own professional development, would you mind telling me if it was because I caught you at a bad time, or if it was because it was something else? And that'll get you the real objection. The other thing you can do is you can push a little bit harder. So instead of pulling, you can do a push. And so what you can do is, I can say, hey, Mateo, I saw you were at this company. And typically when you're at an IPO company, you have super sophisticated processes. But on the private side, you find that you're doing stuff in spreadsheets. Moderately interested to see if we can get you the public infrastructure on the private side. And I would cut it there. So keep your responses super, super short and focused about them. I'm understanding something about you. I'm going to put that context up there, and I'm going to get you to sit up when you're like, whoa, I'm surprised that person knew that about me. And I'm going to give you some small indication that I know a problem that you might have based on what I know about you, and tell you I might be able to solve that problem for you. And that's it. Don't write these long paragraph essays.
Mm-hmm. Seems like you're a huge fan of just like really understanding your prospects' world and understanding their challenges probably better than your own. Mm-hmm. How do you like understand the world of your prospect when maybe it's just really, I guess like the realms of what like the space that your product serves? It seems like really technical and advanced, at least from my perspective. Like, how do you get your team to like really understand like their prospects' world and their challenges, and how you guys can like help solve those challenges?
Yeah, and I tend to not have a lot of empathy for reps who are like, I don't know anything about the industry. I was thinking about this the other day, and someone was like, I don't know anything about the space. And I was like, what's a really boring space that nobody talks about? And I somehow came up with air conditioning. And I looked up air conditioning on the Apple Podcast page, and I found 7 HVAC podcasts. So the first thing is, if you don't own your own development, sorry, dude, you're never going to be the number 1 guy on your team. Every single sales floor has somebody who immerses themselves in the space. Pick up a blog, pick up a news post or a newsletter, pick up a podcast once a week, twice a week, read it. Do it in the morning, do it in the evening, whatever. Build it into your routine. The other thing that's a little bit more actionable than owning your professional development is, before you pick up a phone or before you start going on discovery calls, outline the 2 or 3 buckets of pain that your customers tend to have, and understand and literally map out, this is what it looks like in real life, and then this is what it looks like in my solution. And if you can, and go talk to customers, talk to your CFO or talk to your head of HR, whoever you're selling to, and say like, hey, this is what it looks like in the good world, but can you tell me what it looks like in normal life when they're not on our solution? And that's your discovery playbook. That's your cold call playbook. And if you do that, you'll all of a sudden start to be able to piece together the types of questions you need to ask, because you'll be able to say, typically people who don't have a solution have this, and this type of problem. Are you having any of those? And if they are, then you can say, great, we solve those problems by doing X.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome, man. I love the way you laid it out, like a formula pretty much.
Yeah.
Interesting, man. What I really admire about you, Armand, is like, you really know your stuff, man. I feel like you wouldn't tell your reps to do anything that you haven't even tried 30 times already. Like, in your opinion, like, how much of an advantage do you feel it gives you as a sales leader to know that, like, you know the process, you know how it works, and you can do it, and you can show your team you can do it? How valuable is that, in your opinion?
Yeah, so to me, I think there are way too many talking heads out in the sales leadership world where people will say, make cold calls or sell some value or do this disco, but they don't actually know how to do it themselves. I'm not afraid to get on the floor right next to an SDR, and I'll rip cold calls right alongside with you. And I'll be talking crap the whole way in a positive way. I'm going to have fun with it, man. And I would encourage every sales leader to get on the floor with their reps, get in a discovery call with them, eat some tough objections. Dude, I've gotten rejected in front of my team. I do it with my feet up on the table, laughing my ass off. Excuse my language. And you got to get in the fray. The other thing that it helps you do is, a lot of times you'll hear something from your manager and they'll be like, well, ask him this question. And the rep looks at them like they have two heads. They're like, I can't ask that. Are you crazy? And it's not always, it's typically around impact questions where it's like, well, what are you going to do when you miss your budget? And if your manager tells you to ask that, well, you're like, shoot, I'm not going to ask that to the CFO. But if you show them how to ask it with the right tone, without making it sound like a jerk, well, shoot, man, it sounds like you're in a tough spot. I mean, I'm curious, like, what happens when you guys are off $5,000 on your budget? And they hear you ask it like that, all of a sudden it sinks in, and it's like, oh, my manager actually understands how to phrase things, and your advice becomes more practical and expected. So long-winded answer of saying every manager needs to get on the floor with their reps and get in the trenches, because it gives you a degree of credibility that a lot of other people don't have.
100%, man. I really respect that. And thank you so much for that, man.
Yeah.
Taking it one extra layer back here. I really enjoyed your Mother's Day post on LinkedIn, holding up your wrestling belt. I thought it was really cool, man. Wouldn't even expect that side of you. I'm curious, man, like, do you mind just sharing briefly about, like, just your experience in wrestling, and if just any sort of experience that you had as a wrestler sort of resonated or translated to, you know, what you do now in sales?
Yeah. So a lot of people don't know this about me, and they look at me like I'm crazy when I say this. I'm actually an extremely introverted person. I'm very opinionated and I'm pretty outspoken, but I'm very introverted, which means I'm not good with human interaction. Things like this exhaust me a lot. I'm going to go sit on my couch after this and probably just lay down for a little bit because I'm tired. I don't do well at happy hours. And when I first started college wrestling or high school wrestling, I was a short, fat, out of shape kid with zero self-confidence. Not a lot has changed, I suppose, but in all seriousness, I worked my ranks up in high school. I wrestled all the way through high school and then also through college. And what it taught me was you will live and die by your own practice schedule on the mat. If you weren't putting in 110% in at practice, I didn't have, as a wide receiver or running back, to rely on. I didn't have, as an offensive lineman, the guy next to me to pick up the block when I missed it. It was me. And so if I didn't practice night and day and put everything I got into my own development, I was going to get embarrassed in front of my entire school on a wrestling mat wearing a spandex unitard. Okay. And that's where I started to develop things like my morning routine. So for example, that's during wrestling, I started learning every morning I'm going to wake up, I'm going to go hit the weights, and I'm going to read. And that's what gets me going. I need to read in the morning and I need to exercise, and that gets me centered for my day. Then I go to school and then I go to practice later in the day. And as a sales rep, I've started to build the same thing when I'm investing in my craft, because even though I'm in leadership right now, when I was a rep in the morning, I would be reading a sales book. I would go work out. I would get into the office and I'd be on fire from the workout. I would rip 100 cold calls and I would call it a day at 10 a.m. And I'd be like, boom, I've done more outbound than most people are going to do in the next 3 days in the first 3 hours of the day. And so that mindset of like owning your own development, having a morning routine in place, and getting out there and time blocking and being super efficient in everything you do is something that I wouldn't trade in wrestling for anything else.
That's a great story, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Coming to a wrap here, man. Obviously, a really tough time in terms of employment. A lot of SDRs on the hunt for their next opportunity. Just wanted to take a couple minutes, man. If you could share any advice for, SDRs out there, or just any sales rep that's in between jobs and just, looking for their next opportunity, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, so I've never gotten a job that I haven't networked my way into. And that's part of the reason. I'm only 27 and I'm in a pretty sizable org. I made director at 27, and you get there by building really, really strong relationships with people out there. And if you don't have those relationships out there, you got to do what a good sales rep does, and you got to start doing some cold outbound. And so what I would not suggest you do is do not go apply to 80 jobs right now and scattershot. You're going to waste a ton of time burning your resume just over and over and over. And that's the most exhausting thing to do. What I found is helpful is I pick my criteria, similar to how you're building an account list. I knew when I was looking at companies, I was looking for companies between Series B and Series E, because that was like the sweet spot in the venture market where it was starting to become a growth company. It wasn't quite like right before IPO yet, but it wasn't super early Series A. Pick your sweet spot, pick your team size, pick a couple of things you're looking for. Narrow down your list to 10 or 20 companies you really want to go after. Go start looking on LinkedIn like a good sales rep does. Go to the employees page of every company and filter for anybody on the sales team. First, add anybody who went to the same college as you. And if you didn't get enough people, add everybody else on the sales team with a tailored message and do something related to that person. And salespeople appreciate the hustle. It's one of the few spaces where you're allowed to do cold outreach aggressively, and sales reps appreciate it. And so all you do from there, you reach out and you try to connect with 10 salespeople. Maybe 2 come back. You ask for an informational conversation and you ask for advice on what it takes to be a good rep at this company. You have a conversation. You do your research about them. You ask some good questions. You do research on the company. And then at the end, if you've done a good job of doing your research, inevitably the referral conversation tends to come up. Or you say, hey, I'm planning on putting my application in. Would it be ridiculous to ask you to flag it with a recruiter when I submit it? And that's how you get jobs. Do that 10 times. I promise you, you got all your interviews set up. You don't need to do these 90 applications.
Dude, that was some of the most amazing recruiting advice I've ever heard, man. Thank you so much. Super, super helpful. I think a lot of people out there will find it valuable, man. Armand, for anyone out there that, wants to reach you directly, chat with you, they want a personal demo of Magna from you, where can they find you? Where can they get in touch?
Absolutely, man. So there's only one me on LinkedIn because my name is spelled sort of funny. So find me Armand Farrokh on LinkedIn. I'm pretty bad at messages, but I try to respond to as many as I can. If you comment on one of my posts, I do try to look and respond to all the comments. Or you can email me for something Carta related at armand@carta.com. So LinkedIn and armand@carta.com. That's how you get me.
Sweet. Armand, we really appreciate you being an awesome guest this week, man. Best of luck to everything on your end and on your team, man. And we hope to have you on the podcast again soon.
Love it, man. Take it easy.